Hello, everybody. Today we're welcoming Richelle. She's a serial expat who's been living abroad since 2013, and now she helps people create their dreams to live abroad as well. So, hello, Richelle. How are you?
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Wonderful having you here today. So, where are you joining us from?
So I currently live in Tbilisi, Georgia. So the country, not the state. So I usually have to clarify, especially with Americans. But yeah, Tbilisi, Georgia.
Awesome. Yes. Yeah. You always see like some of these cartoons or whatnot, and they say "Made in Georgia," and you're always like, "Wait, is that Georgia?" It even has a peach as a logo. So,
Well, that would be the state. Not too many beaches
yes.
here, I don't think.
No, no, not doing any beaches. So I'm always like, oh, made in Georgia. Is it Georgia or is it Georgia? So, for those who aren't familiar with you at all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name's Rochelle. I am the Move Abroad coach. So basically, what I do is I help people who want to move abroad, who've had dreams of moving abroad maybe for years, but just haven't been able to make it happen yet. But yeah, I'm originally from Seattle in the US. And as you said, I've been living abroad since 2013, and I did get my start teaching English. So I both taught in the classroom in China, but I also taught online as well. And I did some college counseling too in the education industry. But after a while, I was blogging about my experience, and I had a lot of people coming to me asking saying, I want to do that too. Like, how do I find a job that's legitimate? Like, how do I get started doing this? And eventually I just found myself creating an unpaid part-time job where I was coaching people via email just to kind of, and like the more blog posts that I wrote and the more guides and stuff I created, the more I realized that it just wasn't going to be enough. And for a lot of people, we need that face-to-face contact. We need somebody who we can just ask questions to when things pop up. And there's a lot more to it than just like, oh, here's a job. Like that's only one piece. So I eventually created a coaching program called the Freedom Life, and I worked with people to get them abroad, living their dream life abroad. That's what I do.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so you've been doing that for a while now. So would you say you live to travel or you travel to live?
That's an interesting question. I would say I might travel to live just because having a lifestyle where I can live abroad and I can travel and I have this job that allows me to be remote, like this has allowed me to create an incredible life for myself. And that is what to me feels like I'm truly living, if that makes sense, is the freedom and the flexibility to travel. Also, just in terms of your money going further in certain countries and the opportunities that you get when you're abroad, like this to me feels like living. So the ability to travel and to live abroad like has helped me create this wonderful life for myself. So probably travel to live.
Hey, you like it. That's yeah. I
Yeah.
hear that a lot. A lot of people just they brings out life in them when they're traveling, rather
Mm-hmm.
than being you're stuck in your mundane life that you feel like there was always something missing. So,
Yeah. I don't think I'd be
now,
truly living if I just stayed where I was.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I've always been moving around my whole life. So, uh, now as I understand it, you got the travel bug while in China, correct?
I mean, I've been obsessed with other countries since I was a little kid. Like we had we had like a children's encyclopedia with photos, and I used to like look at the foods of other countries and try to imagine myself. I was like a very weird 3 year old. But anyway, I first got started, like thankfully I had the opportunity to travel a couple of times with my family growing up. But my first kind of stint abroad by myself was when I studied abroad in China. I did a spring semester and a summer semester in Beijing and Xi'an. And after going there, I was like, okay, I went back to the US to graduate. But the whole time I thought one of my biggest fears was getting a really good job in the US. Like I went to school in DC and I was like, what if I get this really good job in Washington, DC, and then I don't ever leave? So I kind of had this almost fear of getting trapped in a comfortable situation. And so I didn't even apply for any jobs in the US. I just decided I'm going to go and I'm going to teach abroad for a year or two in China. I'm going to have that experience. I'm going to be able to travel because in my study abroad program, I was doing a lot of Chinese studying and a lot of homework. And I just wanted that, that sort of fun international, like live abroad experience. I wanted to be able to travel around Asia. And then I was like, okay, then I'll go back after a year or two. I'll go back to the US, get a real job, and start my real life. And that was almost 11 years ago. And I have not lived in the US since. So, yeah, a lot of people think when you go abroad, you're going to go for like a year or so. And some do, but many of us don't.
Oh yeah. Yeah, some people just yeah, it grows on them and they want to keep doing it because from experience, it
Mhm.
is hard to get out of a lifestyle. Like when you do get that job, you start that career,
Mhm.
you feel the needs for the next level, the pressure to move up and up and up and up, and then, what? How do I ever do? How do I break out of this cycle to go fulfill my dreams? Unless I'm 60 or whatever, and I retire, and then I start doing it.
Yeah, that's a lot of who I work with is the people who kind of felt like me or maybe discovered later on, that this is what they want to do, but they did everything they were supposed to do, right? Like you graduated college, you got the good job, you've got the career set up, maybe you've got a 401k, you've got health insurance, maybe a partner, kids, pets, a house, and now you're like, okay, wait, I'm not happy, right? Like that's a lot of the people that I work with. Most of the people I work with are, yeah, in their 30s or 40s, or some even in their 50s and 60s. But yeah, rarely ever am I working with the 22-year-olds like myself when I moved abroad who have nothing to lose. Because I think that's when you do need a little bit of extra help, is when you're like, but what if I give up this great job that I worked a decade for and I've got really good health insurance, and then I leave and I come back and I can't get a good job again, and I can't get that same health insurance again, and I'm throwing my career away, and what's everyone going to think? And plus I can't move abroad with pets, and I'm like, well, he's over there. I've got two cats. So and a baby on the way. So I'm like, you can move abroad with pets and
Ooh,
kids.
yes,
But yeah, it's not as easy when you're a little bit further in your career and in your life.
yes, I totally understand all of it. Like because my wife and I, we also travel full time while working, but we really don't stay
Mm-hmm.
somewhere longer than tourist visa might allow. What sort of experiences have you had navigating digital nomad visas, work abroad visas, that type of thing in your travels?
Yeah, that's a great question because I've had lots of different types of visas. I had complicated work visas, and then yeah, I did the digital nomad thing for a while as well, where we were just hopping around on tourist visas. Right now in Georgia, Georgia actually has one of the easiest visas, like probably the easiest, not even probably, it just is, for Americans to live abroad. You just show up and you can live here for a year and you don't have to apply for anything. You literally just show up and you're granted a 1-year tourist visa, and they don't care if you work remotely on it as long as you're making your money outside the country. You just have to pay taxes if you're here for more than 6 months, but the taxes are only 1%. So it's a really great setup. But if you're not interested in countries like Georgia, I have helped a lot of people in my programs navigate the digital nomad visas. Some are more complicated than others. Off the top of my head, Greece, Croatia, and Estonia are all very straightforward to apply for. Whereas like Portugal and the new one in Spain that everyone's excited about, you might
Yes.
want to get some help with like an immigration expert, just because their rules are more like guidelines, and they often expect more than what they tell you that they want. So they get they get a little bit more complicated. That's why, like in my main coaching programs, we actually bring in a visa expert to answer those questions, because some of the countries can get very complicated. But for those of you, I was just realizing some of you might not know what a digital nomad visa is.
Oh, that's true.
Basically, it's a visa. Yeah, I'd probably just quickly explain it. Basically, it's a visa that allows you to work remotely and stay in that country for a year or more. And they're totally fine if you work remotely, as long as you're making your money outside the country. And so a lot of them have these requirements that you need to hit, one of which is typically an income requirement. So you show that you're making a certain amount of money each month, like 2,000 US dollars or 3,500 euros per month. So that's usually the main requirement. And then of course there's other ones as well.
Yes.
That's
All of
the
them
main
have
one we want to
different
watch
types
out
of
for.
rules. Yes. Yes.
Yes, they all have their own rules, but that is probably, if you want to stay somewhere long term, this is something that's really cool, because when I first moved abroad, these visas did not exist. Like, I remember when the very first one in Estonia came out and we were all super excited. I was living in China at the time. We were all super excited and we're like, this is such a good idea. Oh my gosh. And now, especially in Europe, but there are some countries in the Caribbean and Latin and South America and Asia that are starting to come out with them or that have them. But it's really common in Europe. And it's such a, like, every single year there's more that get announced and more that get passed, and it's very exciting for a lot of us who want to stay in the country for a bit longer.
Oh yeah. Well, we've kept our eye on the one from Malaysia, Spain that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
Portugal. I mean, there's several different really cool ones that you can take advantage of, depending on your circumstances. We had
Mm-hmm.
friends who were even did it in Malaysia, where they ended up having to start a business to get it, and
Yes.
it was a totally different style. But there are many different ways that people can do this type of travel and get into the country legally. Under those different
Mm-hmm.
types of visas that exist.
Yeah, if you have a business or if you're a freelancer, it opens you up even more, because you can either start a business like in the country, or there are freelancer visas in a lot of countries. So you actually have, I mean, those visas tend to be harder to apply for, and I'm assuming your friends got help with that. But it actually opens you up even more if you're a freelancer or you have your own business.
Definitely.
Mhm.
So you've gone to a lot of different places. What would you rank as your top three?
This is a really, really hard question.
It
I would say probably my favorite country that I've ever been to, and I have not lived there, but I would totally live there if they had a good visa that worked for me, is Taiwan. And I might be angering some Chinese people by saying that, but I really love Taiwan, and like I speak Mandarin as well, so it was nice to be able to get around. But honestly, probably my favorite country is Taiwan. My favorite country for like backpacking around and traveling on a budget and getting a little bit off the beaten path is probably the Philippines. I had a lot of really great experiences going to less popular islands in the Philippines, especially on a budget. Like, I really enjoyed that. Oh gosh, this is really, really hard. It's crazy because I love Europe too, but the ones that first come to my head are all in Asia, because I'm like, oh, and I love Japan as well.
well, Asia
Because
is
I did like
amazing.
a yes, and I do love Europe. But yeah, I did a trek. Like, if you've heard of the Camino de Santiago in Spain, they have a similar one called the Kumano Kodo in Japan, where I did this hike through rural Japan for 2 weeks in Mie Prefecture, and it was just incredible. Like, getting like outside of, I mean, of course I love Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka, but like getting outside of those cities, I mean, and the food too, for
Oh,
sure.
food,
I
yes.
mean, it's hard. I lived in China for 5 years, so obviously it has a soft spot in my heart as well. So it's very hard to choose.
Destinations are interesting because I remember countries mostly either sometimes with the cool things you see, but I always remember the food. The food
Yes.
comes back. There are so
And
many
it's
stories that we have.
and when it comes to, I mean, there's certain countries, so I think I love their food, and then I live there, and I'm like, but can I eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day? That's the real test of whether or not I really, really love a country's food. So, like, for example, in China, because there's so much regional variety, I could have Chinese food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day and never get bored. Whereas like I couldn't do that in Vietnam or Georgia as much as I do love the food here. After Asia, having a wine, cheese, and bread was nice. That's what
Uh,
Georgia's known for.
oh, I know. I did that in Thailand. I had curry, a different kind of curry every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yes. It
So
sounds
I could
good
never
until
get
I
tired
feel
of
like
it.
my stomach might be mad at me. But
No, never had that problem. Not there yet. So, so
ah, nice.
it crushed my fingers. Yes. So I know that different people are different stages of life. They work abroad life is different. Like for me, we live out of a suitcase. We drive everywhere. So kind of my car and my suitcase are kind of my home. Do you have a home base, or what do you do for that right now?
Yes. So this is my home base. This is like our office slash guest bedroom. So I've been living in this apartment for, I think, just over 2 years, which is probably the longest I've lived in an apartment ever. Like probably the longest I've lived in a place ever, except my childhood home. But yeah, so we've, as you can see, I've hung up like a big world map. Like we're really enjoying it here. And it's funny that you mentioned that you travel with a car because I have not owned a car like since high school. I just don't have a car. And I specifically live in places where I don't need one. But yeah, I think that's one kind of nice thing about being a little bit more expatty is like being able to have a place where you can buy things and you can bring a little bit more stuff because being a digital nomad in the past and moving every 2 to 3 months, I'm sure you can only have so much stuff. Maybe in a car you can pack a little extra, but now I have the ability, like I have 2 street cat rescues and we've outfitted our kitchen with like an air fryer and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So we just bought a new mattress. So yeah, when you
Ooh.
live in a place, yeah, my mattress is killing me. When you live in a place a little bit longer term, you can afford to kind of invest in the place where you live and create more of a home. Whereas if you're moving around all the time, you get to see more places, but you don't get to kind of create that home base in the same way.
Yeah, we were on that path of creating a home base when we were in Malaysia for a while. Spent 18 months there. Bought a mattress, yeah, did all that. You're getting comfortable and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I totally understand that because the longer you are somewhere, the more you accumulate and yeah, just
Mm-hmm.
comfortable. Driving like we do is a totally different monster. I mean, it's always change. But yes, but we get to have a little bit extra stuff. We get to accumulate things. When we finish driving, though, it's going to be weird getting rid of things or like, again doing that whole thing.
Yeah, thankfully there are those buy and sell Facebook groups and things like that.
Yes.
Or some countries have marketplace, but most of the countries I've lived in don't.
Yeah.
But they
No.
have like Facebook groups where you can sell things. So you're not like I know if we were to leave here, we could sell our mattress, we could sell our air fryer. Like I'm not at a complete loss. Like somebody else will gladly take those items off our hands and contribute some of that cost back to us, which is nice.
You have a really cool teaching story from like something unique that comes to mind when you were teaching while traveling.
Ooh. So is this any sort of teaching? Can I talk about on the ground teaching or is it only
Yeah.
online?
Oh, it can be anything. We
All
got
right.
teachers who are traveling to teach and teaching online to travel too. So
Okay, awesome. So yeah, my first year teaching abroad in China, it was kind of a disaster. I'm just gonna be honest. So I showed up, I used a teach abroad program and I really don't recommend them for most countries. But this wasn't like a government program, it was a private program. And they promised us all this stuff, most of which never actually happened. And they placed me alone on a factory lined highway in the middle of nowhere where I was the only foreigner for miles. Like I was the only non-Chinese person anywhere. Everybody in the town knew who I was. Like I had taxi drivers being like, "Oh, I drove you in October once." And I'm like, "Oh,
cool.
it's May now. That's interesting that you remember me." But everybody knew who I was. And I was the first foreign teacher our school had ever had. And I taught it was 10th, 11th, and 12th. I taught all of 10th and all of 11th grade. So I saw each class once every 2 weeks. And so I taught like the same thing to the entire grade. And my goal was just to make English fun. I was like the oral English teacher. I just came in to get them talking and stuff like that. But it was definitely a very interesting experience to be like the only the only non-Chinese person in my entire town. The whole town knew who I was, the whole school knew exactly who I was. And it was kind of in a way like being a little bit of a celebrity. And
Mhm.
students, like especially the first few weeks, I'd walk by their classroom and they'd scream like like, hi, I'm here now. But yeah, it was definitely an experience. I definitely going back would have done some stuff differently, but am kind of glad that I had that experience because, I got to see a side of China that most people don't ever get to see. I got invited to a lot of people's houses for dinner. Like I got to interact with people who they were confused. They were like, is she from Xinjiang? Like, is she a Uyghur? Like, what is she? Because I spoke Mandarin too. So they were like, who is she? Like, what is she doing here? Um, but yeah, it was, I taught like classes of 50 and they were all my students were just really funny. And I expected them to be like very studious and good at memorizing and all the stereotypes for China. And that was not the case. They were like, oh, I love Justin Bieber and like trying to text her in class and like all that, all
Ah,
the stereotypical stuff that you see. But yeah, so it was a really good experience, but it was also because like let's be real, it was kind of lonely being there by myself. Like a lot of the teachers didn't live near the school, like they traveled in and I lived on campus. And because I made a lot of mistakes, like that's kind of what sparked me writing about my experience and being really open about it. And it's also what inspired me to start coaching because I saw that there were so many better jobs out there and I was so underpaid. And I signed this contract that I couldn't get out of without owing my school my entire salary for the entire year. Like I made a lot of
oh,
mistakes as a 22-year-old. But I saw that there were a lot of better jobs out there just in terms of salary and benefits and location. And I was like, why are these so hard to find? Right? Like, so many people were saying, oh, I'm worried about getting scammed or I'm worried about what happened to you happening to me because the program made me all these promises that they did not keep. And that's how I got started coaching. I originally got started coaching, helping people teach abroad in China because like it was just you couldn't find a lot of these really good jobs and I knew they existed and I knew how to do it and I knew what the proper benefits were and what to look out for in a contract, but a lot of people didn't. So
mhm.
I just wanted people to avoid what happened to me. And then I started seeing that across the board where there are so many people who want to move abroad but are worried that they're going to be trapped in a situation where they're not happy or they're worried that it's all going to fall apart or that they made the wrong decision or that they can't make it work. And so a lot of people just don't go because of that. And then that's when, well, especially during COVID, I started branching out to help people move anywhere, not just
Ah,
China.
yeah.
But that experience is what actually got me started coaching.
It's really cool. Yeah, because yeah, it is difficult. And I've only been to China one time, and it was just for a quick layover,
Mm-hmm.
3 day layover. But I've always wanted to go back and see it more. And now I hear they're opening up more, and my students are like, "Come visit," and I'm but it's a daunting challenge thinking about going someplace like China, different rules, different regulations. How do you go? Do you just do a tourist thing like I've always done? Do you go long term? And how do you make that happen? So like in today's climate, how do you work with people and talk to them about moving to China at this point?
I mean, China is a difficult one because, yeah, the border, ever since COVID, I actually have been helping more people get out of China than get into
You know?
China at this
Yeah.
point. We have had some people get stuck there and like have difficulty getting out because their flights keep getting canceled.
Yeah.
So as of right now, China's a little bit iffy in terms of moving there. But with any country, right? I think there's especially fear if you're signing a contract for a job on the ground, like, oh, what if I don't like it and stuff like that. But I think with my coaching, what we do is we get really clear on like, okay, we're going to develop your own personalized plan that fits you and your lifestyle and your goals. So for example, you move around a lot in your car and you have your suitcase, that's the lifestyle that you want. And if that's what you wanted, like we would make that happen, right? Whereas if you want to move to Europe on a digital nomad visa and work online and stay in a country for a year or more, we'd work on making that happen. And I think that's really important because everybody wants different things. So some people do want to teach abroad in Asia. Other people see that and they're like, that is the absolute last thing that I would want to do. Like, I want to work remotely. I want to be able to travel. I want to be, I want to be in Europe or in South America. Like, just because I'm teaching doesn't mean I need to teach on the ground. And the great thing is we have so many opportunities. The most important first step is figuring out, okay, out of all these opportunities, like now you have this buffet of options, which ones do you want? And then we create this personalized plan to actually make it happen. And I think that's so important because so many like influencers or programs will try to kind of push you in a certain direction. And we have so many more options now than we did when I was 22 and I just signed up for a program, because back then, like teaching in Asia was like the only way I was ever going to get abroad. Either that or learn some freelancing skill and backpack, right? Like that was it. So now we have a lot more options. So it's just getting clear on what do you actually want to do and then putting that plan into place.
Excellent. That's very good advice. So it looks like you've taken a lot of experience with your own travels over the last, what, 10, 11 years. Uh, and now you've turned that into an awesome coaching business. You help other people look and do the same thing that you wanted to do and find ways to do it the way that they like to, or that they kind of imagine themselves doing it. What are some life lessons that you feel potential full-time travelers should know?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think some of the biggest ones that come up for me, like kind of in my coaching that we talk about a lot, is the first one is you are not a tree. So we have like, I am not a tree, hashtag 2023 was like the thing that came up in my last boot camp. But if you don't like somewhere, you can move. And there's this idea that it's like the first country that I move to or the first decision that I make, it has to work out and it has to be this way, and if it doesn't work out I have to go back home. But if you're not happy with the situation you've created for yourself, especially if you did it yourself, like if you created the plan yourself and implemented it yourself instead of relying on, like, let's say a program to do it for you, if this isn't what you want, you have the tools and the knowledge and the skills to fix it. Like, the goal is that you're empowered enough to actually go and make a change. So if you decide that you're going to teach English in South Korea and you show up and you don't love it and you realize you'd rather be in South America teaching online, you have the tools to actually do that. You don't have to go back home. And then even if you realize that it's not for you and you do decide to go back to your home country, it doesn't mean that you're a failure. And a lot of people are worried about failing. And my philosophy is the only failure is not going after what you want in life. It's not going after your dreams. Like, that's the failure. If you moved abroad or if you start this digital nomad life and it's not for you, that's not a failure, because at least you did it. At least you tried. Now you have no regrets. Now you know. And so if this is something that you really want to do, you're going to regret not doing it, right? Like, you're going to wake up at 80 years old and be like, gosh, like, I really wish that I would have tried that. I wish I would have done that. So I think, if this is something that you really want to do, like, you need to make it a priority, because it is a lot of steps and it can feel overwhelming. But if you just take it and you divide it up into steps, into like little bite-sized actionable pieces, and start checking it off, you'll get there. But if you want to do it, you've got to actually start on the process. And a lot of people, they push it off. They're like, oh, I don't have time to focus on moving abroad right now, I'll do it later. But if you divide it up. Like, I'm going to work on my resume this week, right? Like, you can push it off by a couple of days, but you're not going to push working on your resume off by a year, right? So I think those are probably the main ones. Like, if you want to do it, divide it up and start checking things off. You are not a tree. If you don't like it, you can move. And if you do come home, or if your first place doesn't work out, you're not a failure. There's nothing wrong with you. It just means you went after a dream and it turns out that wasn't actually your dream.
It's really cool. Yeah. Uh, and so some of these ideas that you say, they come up in your workshops, and things like that. How many people do you usually have in your workshops?
For the last couple, we've had like 250 to 300 people. I do these live workshops. They're called the Escape Plan Boot Camp or Move Abroad Escape Plan Boot Camp. And this is actually where we do step one, right? Where we figure
Hmm.
out, okay, here's all your options. What do you want, right? Like, what kind of lifestyle do you want? Do you want to be a digital nomad and move around every few months? Or do you want to stay in one place longer term? Like, what exactly do you want? How are you going to make money doing that? Where do you want to move? And then, like, day four is let's put it all together and actually talk about your next steps. And then, yeah, for anybody who wants to continue working with me after those workshops, that's where you could join my coaching program if you wanted to.
And I want to point that out to some of the people watching. 250 people just in your last workshop, or more. You're not alone out there. There are so many people who
Yes.
want to live, want to change things up. They want to have some kind of a life that's different, or that they see maybe on Instagram. They might see the unreal sides and they know that there's some real expectations in there, and they want that for themselves. There's a lot of people out there that want the same types of things, and you can make it happen. So,
Yeah, and I think the community is a big part because at least a lot of people I work with say, I don't know anybody who's done this. Like, I don't know anyone who's moved abroad or who's been a digital nomad. And the people in my life, like, they don't necessarily get it. Like, my parents are very concerned, my friend, my coworkers, like, what are you doing? And that's where knowing other people and doing things like, yeah, participating in summits or going to workshops and boot camps, like, you can meet other people who want to do the same thing. And we've had people, like, in my last boot camp, somebody wrote in the Facebook group, like, yeah, a few of us hopped on a call for 3 hours last night on Zoom and we're just talking. And I was like, well, that's great, right? Like, you can meet other people who want to do exactly what you want to do. And then it doesn't feel weird. It doesn't make you feel alone. And that's part of how I got started. Like, I felt comfortable enough to teach abroad in China is because I studied abroad in China and I met other people doing it. I felt comfortable leaving my job in China to be a digital nomad and try and work for myself because I met so many awesome people, like when I travel in hostels, who are like, yeah, I'm a freelancer or I teach English online and I'm traveling the world and I'm staying in hostels. And I'm like, that's a thing you could do, right? So especially back then, nobody was talking about it.
right.
So, it's meeting other people doing the same thing as you helps show you that it's not crazy. Like, it's not weird. There are a lot of people who want to do this. It's just a matter of finding them.
Yeah. I mean, 20 years ago, my wife and I started traveling together, and we were always the young ones everywhere we went. And we were like, well, I'd love to do this more, but it looks like it's only for elderly people. Life has changed quite a bit now. I see people of all different ages. We've made friends of people traveling with people from all different ages. And I think that's one of the more important things for us is finding different communities of people to be a part of and talk with. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what do you find? Do you find that there's a little bit of a disconnect or a loneliness at times with your traveling, or do you might manage to find groups of friends that you can continuously work with and talk with and share with?
I think no matter where you are, sometimes you're going to feel a little bit lonely. Like, even when I was in the US, I sometimes felt lonely. But I think, living abroad, it's almost easier to make friends in a lot of cases because, especially with people, who are also traveling and living abroad, because they need friends too, right? Like, everybody needs friends. And so it's like, it's like showing up the first day in college or university, right? Everybody's like looking for new friends, especially if you go to school or not everyone's from the same area. Everyone's looking for friends. And so that's kind of how it feels when you show up at certain events and things like that when you live abroad. Everyone's like, I'm new here. I'm looking for friends, or some of my friends just moved away, and things like that. So I actually find it easier to help to find communities when I live abroad and I travel, because there are people who get it and who are also looking for that connection. And then, yeah, if you have a job on the ground, like then you have built-in friends with both people who are, expats and then also locals, which is always nice.
Yes. Um, do you try to learn a little bit of the language wherever you go, or is that just too much, too daunting?
I try, but it depends on the country, how easy that is. So for example, I studied Mandarin in university. So like I I'm like conversationally fluent-ish. I hate saying the word fluent, but it's like somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But then I tried in Vietnam and oh my gosh, it was so much harder,
Yeah.
especially without like the background in the intense classes. So I at least always try to learn survival, like the survival phrases. So I try to be polite and learn, maybe 10 or so phrases. And then if the language is easier, I will actually try to learn it. So, for example, we were recently in Mexico scoping it out as a potential place to move. And I did learn some Spanish in high school. So I had my Duolingo and I was practicing and stuff like that. So I found that to be way easier than, let's say, Georgian, where there is no Duolingo for Georgian. And if I look something up, there is no, like on Google Translate, there's no pronunciation sound for me to listen to.
Ah,
So I'm just looking at like a romanization of Georgian and I have no idea how to pronounce it. So I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? Right. There's like somebody on TikTok who's been helpful. I've been saving her stuff, but some languages are much easier than others, but I think there's not a huge expectation of people to learn Georgian in Georgia as long as you learn some of the survival phrases. People get that Georgian is really hard. Whereas if I were to live in Spanish, I would probably want to become conversational in Spanish because it's much easier for me to pick up.
I like your depiction of that with survival phrases, survival language,
Mm-hmm.
wherever you go. Because yeah, I never really thought of it that way. Everywhere I go, I always have a little document in my phone with certain phrases like how to say "How are you?" How to say "Where is this?" How to say that type
Yeah.
of thing. Because yeah, those are important phrases, and I want to be able to be understood at times. So
Yeah,
I
just
like that.
like, thank you, excuse me, sorry, goodbye, how much, like maybe a couple of numbers, like just the basics. I think that the reason I call it survival phrases is because when I lived in China, we used to always call it survival Chinese. So like the basic Mandarin that you would learn to survive. And then I just apply that. Even if I'm traveling, I try to learn, yeah, even if I'm only somewhere for like a week, I try to learn just a couple of words just to be polite.
Excellent. Okay, cool. Now, what is like one unexpected challenge about being a digital nomad that people should be aware of before making this leap?
Ooh, okay. I will answer it as said. So digital nomad. So we'll say moving around every couple months. Unless you'd like me to answer it as a whole, living abroad. But I think it's interesting to talk about the differences between being a digital nomad and being like nomadic, as opposed to basing yourself in one place long term. And so a couple of the challenges that I faced were like, firstly, packing down to like one suitcase was difficult for me, getting like a capsule wardrobe. But I think one thing that a lot of people don't think about is you are working while you're traveling, right? So constantly moving can be really exhausting. And so I met a lot of people, in co-working spaces and stuff when I was doing this who were totally burnt out. And they had this idea of, oh, I'm only going to be a digital nomad for a year and I have to hit all of these places and I have to do all of these things. But they were feeling really tired because they were moving every few weeks. And that's a lot, right? Like when you're working and wanting to explore an area and then constantly moving around, constantly finding a new place to stay, it can be exhausting. So I always tell people, if you want to be more nomadic, if you want to be more of a digital nomad, then if you're enjoying a place, stay a little bit longer. Like stay in, if you want to really get work done, you might want to stay in a place for 2 to 3 months rather than 2 to 3 weeks. And like actually get a long-term rental and settle in for a little bit and make friends. Because also, if you're traveling constantly, it can get a little bit lonely, because you'll meet someone who's really cool and then 2 weeks later you're gone. And that happened to me a lot when I lived in Hoi An in Vietnam. Like I'd meet these awesome people in my co-working space, and 3 weeks later they'd be gone. I'm like, I miss having friends. So at least for me, I decided that I actually prefer to stay in one place a little bit longer, so I could have pets more easily and stuff. And longer term friendships was a big one for me, because I was tired of making new friends all the time. I wanted to have my people and like my go-to coffee shop and the cafe where people know me and like that kind of thing. And so I think that's something where, if you want to, if you're not sure if it's right for you, try it out. And then if it's not and you want to stay someplace a little bit longer, you can always change, right? Like I came to
Yeah.
Georgia thinking I'd be here for 3 months, and I've been here for 3 years. So, like you can always change the lifestyle, but I think that's something to be really aware of if you want to be nomadic, right? Is make sure you build out time to actually get work done. And if you like a place, like I don't know if you agree with this, but I always tell people like throw the schedule out the window. Like if you have
Ah,
your whole year like perfectly scheduled, like you're gonna the people that I saw that did that, it looked miserable, right? Where they're like, I have to be in this place at a certain time and I have to follow this route. Like it's just enjoy it, right? Like, and you'll probably end up doing it for much longer than a year if you actually give yourself time in each place.
yeah. It is daunting to plan out your year. We've done that. We're currently
Mm-hmm.
in a, like a little piece of that right now because I have two major goals this year to be teach my kid to ski here and in the Andes and try to make it to the South Pole or Antarctica, I should say, by Christmas. So those are like two pieces, and then what I do in the middle
Mm-hmm.
is open. Like we found out we really liked it where we are right now in
That's
Ecuador, and we've
nice.
been staying here for 3 months. We're really enjoying this one little spot, so it's a little bit longer. Instead of traveling all around Ecuador, we found one really cool place, cool people. We get to enjoy it. So yeah, I agree with you. Trying to stick to a super stringent schedule over a year or more is really tough, and you would get burnt out. But pick the main things that you want to happen. And if
Mm-hmm.
those are time sensitive, like ski season is a time sensitive season, then you have to figure that
Yeah.
out. And those are
Or
kinds of
like
things to
with us,
consider.
it was all my friends were getting married. All our friends were getting married at similar times. And it's like,
Ah,
okay, we've got a wedding that we're going to in the
it
UK
is.
and
Yep.
like another one in the US. That's how we ended up here. We had a wedding in the UK. We're like, we're already in Europe. We've got to be back in the US in May. My husband's Australian, so we can only be in the US for 3 months at a time because we didn't do the whole green card thing for him. That's a whole nother story. So we were like, we've got 4 months to kill, but we need to get work done. Let's just go to Georgia. They've got a 1 year visa. We'll hang out there. We'll travel in Europe for a little bit. Then we'll go back to the US. Then COVID happened. So obviously plans changed. But yeah, like if you have certain things that you need to be there for, but then keep that flexibility open. Otherwise, like you said, you would have been burnt out. Like you're like, I like it here. I'm going to stay for 3 months. Whereas if you held yourself to this really strict schedule,
Hmm.
it'd be miserable. You'd be miserable.
Definitely. I could see that happening. So as we wrap things up, do you have any kind of special promotion that you'd like to talk to people about or your workshops or?
Sure, yeah. So we have an upcoming, our next boot camp, the Escape Plan boot camp, that's happening a little while off. It's happening at the beginning of June, but we do have a wait list for that if you want to hop on it, and then you'll be the first person to know when that opens up. So that is a live event where we figure out your own personalized move abroad plan. But if you cannot wait, if you want to get started right now, which I'm all for that, I do have a crash course, which is completely like you can do it, it's self-paced. So this is a mini course that basically walks you through step by step the process of moving abroad from start to finish. So that is $37 if you wanted to hop in on that. And then of course, we'll let you know when the boot camp's coming as well.
37, that's an awesome price. That's amazing. So,
Yeah.
and I can speak from experience. Having somebody to help guide you through this process is immensely important. Trying to do it on your own is tricky. It's stressful. And so to find somebody who you can trust and who you can work with and get some advice and then build that relationship so then you have somebody else to talk to in the future is invaluable. So I hope some people message you about that. If they do want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'd say probably the best place right now is if you're on Instagram, just hop on Instagram at Move Abroad Coach. I'm also on Facebook at Move Abroad Coach. I post a lot of like, not only do I post like, photos and videos of my life abroad, I post a lot of coaching in there. So I actually take snippets of my own coaching calls and put them in there. So if you want to get a feel for my advice and my coaching and learn some stuff, and then also from stories, like see what it's actually like to live in Georgia, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Move Abroad Coach.
Excellent. And we'll have a link to all this, including her workshop down below for anybody who's looking
Awesome.
for that. So, all right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Richelle. It's been very cool talking to you. Uh,
Yeah.
do you have any parting advice before we go?
Ooh, and I was gonna say thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I think probably my biggest piece of advice I kind of mentioned earlier, but this is if this is something that you really want to do, stop putting it off, right? Like if this is something that you want to do, chances are you can do it a lot faster than you think. So many people come to me and they say, "Oh, my plan is to move abroad in 4 years." And I'm like, "Unless you've got a kid who's about to graduate or something like that, like why are you putting it off that long?" And so I know that the process can be overwhelming. And a lot of times we think, oh, I'm too busy to work on this right now. And then we just push everything back. But we don't know how long that we have on this earth. Like, we don't know how many days that we're actually going to get. So if you really want something in your life, and this is something that you've been dreaming about for a long time, like, let's not put it off anymore. And by breaking things down into sort of those bite-sized pieces and just checking them off, like before you know it, you will be abroad. But if you don't start working on those little steps, it's not gonna happen, right? Like, tell me how many people, and I'm sure you've probably talked to a lot of people about this too, have been talking about moving abroad for like 5 years. I mean, I
Oh,
talk to
yeah.
people like I've wanted to move abroad for 10 years, my whole life since I was a kid. Why are we putting this off if it's something that you really want to do? So that's my challenge for those of you listening to this, is to check in with yourself. If it's something that you really want to do, why are we putting it off? Because we're too, and if you say, I'm too busy, I want you to look at what exactly are you so busy doing? Is it because you're prioritizing other people's wants and needs over your own? Maybe, or maybe it might be, maybe we watch a few episodes of TV or spend a few hours scrolling Instagram or TikTok at night when we could just take 1 hour of that and fix up our resume, or 1 hour of that and research visas, because that's all it takes. It's not this whole huge process that needs to take over your life in a matter of a couple of weeks. Like, you can chip away at this and be abroad, by early 2024 if you want to, right? But it's, or
Sure.
earlier if you really want to.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, I mean, you can, I've had people in my program move abroad in like 2 months. So you could go faster if you want to. But for those of you who are, have kind of been putting it off because you're too busy, if you just start doing small little steps, you'll be there. But if we're too busy to even get started, then it's never going to happen. So that's my food for thought slash challenge that I'm going to leave
Yes.
everyone with.
That's an excellent challenge to leave everybody with. So everybody check in with yourself, see what your goals are, see what you can make happen, see what's holding you back, and then contact Rochelle. Yes. All right, everybody. Thank you, Richelle. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. All right, take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.